vi faccio giusto un saluto, no, perché poi invece ciò che succederà dopo, il confronto che ci sarà invece molto animato, molto interessante. Allora, non credo che abbiate voglia di sentire il muro del pianto, però bisogna anche, come dire, avere il senso della realtà. Allora, la realtà è che in questo momento qui abbiamo una amministrazione comunale che ha tagliato drasticamente tutte le istituzioni artistiche di competenza del Comune di Torino. Questo tipo di taglio, e voi immaginate subito, con che cosa è motivato, il patto di stabilità, il rigore, i conti pubblici, eccetera, noi lo possiamo anche vedere in un altro modo, che è quello di una limitazione del diritto sociale all'arte. Se siamo arrivati a questo secolo, il XXI secolo, è perché siamo passati attraverso delle esperienze che hanno fatto maturare tra i nostri bisogni comuni, sociali, profondi, anche quello dell'arte. C'è un diritto sociale all'arte e dunque questi tagli qui sono esattamente una conculcata limitazione del nostro diritto sociale all'arte. Diciamo che la situazione si presenta complessa, ma quello che è abbastanza evidente è che a Torino si stanno moltiplicando delle manifestazioni di carattere effimero, come il Festival del Jazz, che a sentire i musicisti è un doppione secondario e superfluo di altri festival come Umbria Jazz, che hanno veramente un peso internazionale, che sono realmente un momento di confronto, ma che rispondono unicamente alla legge del consenso elettorale. Allora, effimero, feste, notti bianche per garantirsi i voti dei giovani in particolare, ma non è quella la cultura è un processo profondo che vive su dei tempi brevi, vive nel presente ma vive nello stesso tempo anche sui tempi lunghi. Il lavoro che qui fanno gli artisti della bioarte è come il lavoro che si fa nei laboratori scientifici, guardando ai prossimi 10 anni. Ecco, è questo che viene tagliato. Mi fermo qui per stoppare il muro del pianto e passo il microfono per una presentazione più nel merito.
Bene, ringrazio Piero Girardi, sono molto contento che questo incontro, che è il quarto incontro di questi 10 giorni che abbiamo organizzato con Fondazione per l'Arte, sia qui, perché secondo me questa, lo dico senza appunto voler in maniera molto aperta e trasparente, secondo me questa è la istituzione torinese artistica, e non solo torinese, una delle più avanzate che ci sono nel paese, non solo nella città, proprio per la ragione che ha spiegato lui adesso alla fine, perché è qualcosa di che mette insieme lo spirito del laboratorio scientifico ma anche lo spirito del laboratorio sociale, e poi lavora con la materia vivente, che è la cosa più importante e più contemporanea che abbiamo, pur essendo quella più antica e ancestrale. Chiusa questa piccola parentesi incensatoria, è veramente un luogo speciale questo. Sono molto felice perché questo è un incontro che segue un altro incontro che è venuto stamattina, un bellissimo seminario che c'è stato alle 11, molto affollato, e è un incontro tra due artisti che in realtà sono una coppia di artisti e un artista singolo, però dico una coppia di artisti perché Ryan e Trevor Oaks sono due artisti gemelli e sono due esseri umani gemelli che veramente in qualche modo non solo lavorano insieme ma pensano insieme, stanno lavorando su un processo di stanno lavorando su un processo di accumulazione di materiali intorno a come funziona la visione, come noi vediamo, come gli esseri umani vedono il paesaggio, che è veramente straordinario, e qualcuno l'ha definita la più interessante innovazione dai tempi dell'invenzione della prospettiva, quindi, e loro sono giovanissimi, tra l'altro sono due ragazzi americani molto in gamba, molto simpatici anche. Matteo Pericoli è una ormai stella, diciamo, del firmamento editoriale ma anche artistico, diciamo, da entrambe le parti dell'oceano, ma è anche una persona che ha scelto di venire a vivere a Torino e di innervare anche Torino delle sue idee, del suo talento, della sua voglia di dialogare con discipline diverse. Il loro dialogo ha senso perché hanno due cose in comune, anzi tre. Entrambi lavorano col paesaggio, o comunque con la descrizione del paesaggio, entrambi lavorano col disegno in modi totalmente diversi, e entrambi lavorano con la percezione del mondo, del fenomeno, ciò che si vede. E anche in questo modo lavorano, anche su questo punto divergono molto i loro modi di lavorare. Quindi il dialogo che inizierà tra oggi è un dialogo che io spero abbastanza profondo ma lieve nello stesso tempo, e naturalmente aperto anche a un'interazione con voi, e quindi sono molto felice di il modo in cui abbiamo pensato questi 10 giorni di curiosità infinite, esattamente la logica opposta a quella che descriveva adesso Piero, cioè è un evento che vorremmo trasformare in istituzione. Per questo abbiamo fatto 2 cataloghi che sono in qualche modo già una maniera di rendere meno effimera la cosa e più sedimentata. Grazie a voi di essere qua, grazie a Piero, grazie a tutti quelli che hanno reso possibile, e do la parola innanzitutto a Ryan o Trevor.
Okay, thank you very much for coming. So we're going to discuss a couple different approaches to drawing, and in particular drawing cityscapes. And we thought that it would be interesting to come to this topic from a very how-to approach, since we have the work that we've done is similar in some ways and very different in other ways. And so we thought by doing a kind of compare and contrast of the down to the bare bones technique would be interesting. First of all, I think we'll just do a quick cursory outline of the general steps in creating a drawing, or approaching creating a drawing. Sure. Okay. Does someone by chance have the flyer? Because there's a little bit of visual information on the flyer. Yes. Could we see a copy of it?
You want to?
Sure, just one, just so we know what you guys have to look at. Okay. All right. Okay. So it looks like the first 4 pages are a drawing, are drawings that Ryan and I executed, and the last set of pages are Matteo's work on Manhattan Unfurled. So for Ryan and for the drawings Ryan and I do, we developed this way of really copying space down from the surrounding environment, in a way that was closely matched with how we perceived it, standing in a fixed location, a single vantage point, looking out. So one of the main things that we did was, instead of using the traditional flat picture plane, we built a spherical picture plane that matches the shape of human vision, or at least comes close to matching it, in the sense that the light rays that actually come into your eye through your pupil are fanned out from your pupil, horizontally and vertically, to collectively be a set of light rays that are all perpendicular to the surface of a sphere. So we used a spherical sheet of paper to do these drawings, and then developed a technique of getting the lines onto the drawings that comes from analyzing how humans' 2 eyes work together to join the data from each retina in the visual cortex, And in short, our technique involves taking a pen, looking past the pen into the distance, which optically causes the pen to split into two images of itself in your visual cortex. Both of those images are optically transparent, such that you can then hold the actual pen up to the edge of a sheet of paper. You wanna give me a... So let's pretend this is a sheet of drawing paper. We would hold the actual pen, my pinky, up to the edge of the sheet of drawing paper, and then simply by looking past it into the distance, we can cause the pen to optically divide into a double image, and a secondary sort of transparent image appears off to the left, floating out in midair, overlapping the scene in the distance. And if the secondary image is if we look at the secondary image and kind of forget that the first image is there, the secondary image can be used to sort of trace over top of real buildings, trees, objects in the distance, and their proportion can be sort of captured directly from life in a way that matches the visual characteristics that space has. Yeah.
Okay. To talk about a technique in my case is, after hearing this, is a little bit funny, but we have noticed by talking to each other, we almost aim at the same, but coming from basically opposite ends. This one you just heard, and the other one, mine, which is a disastrous way, basically, because the system that now I can maybe start to describe came from having absolutely no system and just the desire of transforming a reality that I was seeing when I was in New York in the mid-90s into something understandable. Probably, in order to talk about the system in a similar way as yours, I rather than the visual field and all of these things, my obsession was with what do I know and how can I know what I'm looking at. Is there any way that drawing can allow me to make all of this mine and transfer it to onto someone else's brain and say, what you see is actually the result of a synthesis. And line drawings, when we'll talk more and you are looking at the samples, you will realize that where I have maybe drawn one line, Trevor has drawn maybe 200. And so just to go to the bare bones and the explanation, in the mid-90s I was obsessed with New York, and I didn't know how to transform it into an object that could be mine. So I took a boat and that goes around the island of Manhattan in 3 hours, and I realized that the distance is something that I had carried within me as a European going to the other side of the ocean, which is the view from one step away from an object. And so I took a roll of architect's paper. I used to work in an architectural office. I studied architecture. I had the fear and the obsession of lines being translated into reality. So for me, one line weighs like probably, I don't know, many dozens of yours, because it uses another way of synthesizing. And I take hundreds of photographs of the same sections that I'm going to try and draw over and over, that then become thousands. And out of this, at some point, something happens. And what happens is that an image or an idea of a place is born. In one of the pages, you will see a selection of perhaps 20 lines, 20 photographs that I took in London for a project that I did of London, and that is basically how reality is normally perceived, in fragments and in hundreds of bits and pieces. The process from there to the next page, which is actually a piece of a New York drawing, is kind of a mystery to me still now, and it goes passes by the page that is right before, which is a small section of the same drawing, where out of nothing something actually happens, and the result is probably the opposite of your work, because it does not resemble reality, although everybody recognizes it. When we talk about these things, is that you have found the contact, and that instead are basically opposites.
That's a very good point. One thing that interests me is the vantage point in your drawings versus the drawings that we've been doing is in the Manhattan Unfurled, it's a traveling vantage point. It carries through the city. It's no one spot where it looks just like that, and if you went back to that spot, the drawing would look like it does. It's as though you're traversing along the island on a boat ride. Yeah.
And then motorcycle, and then bicycle, and then etc. Yeah, and in fact and this again comes to what Gianluigi said. Is it what we think that matters, or is it what we see that matters? And what is it?
When we were talking just a moment earlier before this talk, you had said that when you moved to New York, it was so big, and you wanted to in some way understand just how big it was. And this gets to what you're saying about your process of investigating drawing is about knowledge, and what can you know about a city. And I think that is a difference between ours is like, what can you know about what it feels like to be a human with eyes, and yours is what can you know about the city and the context of the world that you can explore through a passage of time.
I think the issue of time is an important one, because I think we are talking about drawing, and I would like it to be clear, because drawing is a strange, especially line drawing, hard line drawings are, in my case, in the work that I do, are not fully artistic, so to speak. The amount of synthesis, the result of all of the work of looking at hundreds of photographs for days before being able to draw one line is an effort that brings out a result that is seemingly very, very, very simple, which is good, which makes me happy. But when I see what they do, I feel envy, because I feel the envy of not being able to convey the multitude of madness and losing my hair that goes through the process of just doing one line. And time is a funny element, because it takes time to draw. For Ryan and Trevor, it takes time, because if we were to draw this very same tray with the carafe and glasses, I would take a long time before deciding which of those lines will matter to me, will matter to you, which profile of the tray counts more as a change of plane, do the shades matter more or less than the shadows, and I think on, and it's very tiring, but I don't do anything. Whereas once you set up your system, you just use how the brain works and the neurons, so everything gets traced. The amount of time may be the same, but the two results couldn't be more far away from each other, and that's. I wish I had a twin and I could do this.
Oh yeah. There's a selection process. I guess with any scene that's being translated into a drawing, you have to decide what to translate. I mean, it's always going to be a simplification, and so that's a decision-making process that we both go through, and it sounds like the idea of omission versus inclusion, what to include, what not to include. Trevor and I will often at length discuss what the logic is of the scene that we're choosing, and what drawing logic makes sense for that particular scene and for that subject matter. So for a while in the beginning, we were just interested in form and translating the form. So, for example, if you're looking at a building with bricks, we could do a line for every single brick, but no shading of the darker bricks versus the lighter bricks. And after a handful, half a dozen drawings made with that logic, we eventually moved into rendering, including light and shadow, as a way of speaking about the volumes of light that are in the air as opposed to just the form.
Sorry, can you talk about this with each other?
Yeah.
This goes on in my brain by myself. That's why I wish I had a twin. But this is exactly the kind of conversation I do with myself.
Yeah. It's very necessary to in advance decide what the overall logic will be for an image, because there's so many places that it could go. I mean, the complexity of visual reality is endless, and paring it down into a drawing is a huge simplification process. Which maybe you want to.
Sure. So, well, as Ryan said, our initial logic was only to outline edges. If there was a graphic image printed on the side of a building, the graphic image would not be drawn because it didn't involve anything about form.
Or a sign, a billboard.
Yeah, or a billboard. And I think that logic is what is I think most similar to the logic which you've adhered to for your drawings. We were talking. Well, you mentioned a second ago that there's a fear to the lines, which I think that you have a sort of more severe commitment to each line than we do, and it gives but the thing is, like, it was funny. It's funny to hear you use the word fear, because in the finished product, it comes off as maybe solemn, but not no fear at all. It just seems very like commanding, like still, almost as though the drawing is as solidified as the actual architecture would be.
There is something funny about the fear which I haven't understood yet, and maybe you can help me. When I begin, say, a drawing that has to be 37 feet long, 12 meters long, and 37 feet. Manhattan for us was 37 feet, although I didn't know when I began how long it was going to be, how much time and how long. This is the other different, amazingly different.
How many pieces of paper?
One.
Really?
No, one piece of paper, one roll of architects. I stole from Richard Meyer's office, but doesn't mind. I stole a roll of 100-meter long paper, and at night I began from the left edge because I'm right-handed, so my life would have been completely different, not only if I had a twin, but also if I'd been left-handed like you. And this is the other funny thing, is that your entire world, there is infinity within the sphere that you're looking through. And in my case, my unknown landscape goes on and on in length, because it could be anywhere and any time. So the beginning of these kinds of projects, even after I learned how to do it, how to set up, so I take the 6,000 photographs, I try to know that it's going to be 37, 39 feet long, and I do the only hard line with a straight edge for the leaning of the water. Nothing else ever is used with it. Just the line to which I can, lean on, like a restful place, yes, or a bouncing trampoline. Then the first foot is the most terrifying one. And if I make a mistake, what's the problem? I begin again. But I'm terrified. The drawing is rigid, and every line, the fear is 10 times more, as if, and I don't know, maybe you know the reason, as if how you do the very first lines sets the tone, like the beginning of a concert. So if you screw up the very first 3 or 4 or 6 lines, then something will never work 10 meters ahead of me. When I am 10 meters into the drawing, so if I make a mistake, I lose 11 months of work, 10 meters of one single sheet of paper. I don't care. And lines go fast. Everything goes very smoothly. The drawing itself has taken some kind of control. And I wonder if in your almost mantra mechanism, of entering the sphere, it must be the same for you, because there is a moment, and I think it's the same for any discipline. It's the same if you build the buildings or if you cut the grass. At some point, what you do takes over, and I feel much calmer when things are much more dangerous. And this is funny, and it's good, and I don't know why. And I don't have a twin to ask, and I ask myself, and I don't answer. So maybe you can.
Just a question: if you put a line down that you then deem as a mistake, can you take that line back off? No, because it's pen, it's down, it's done. There's no way to erase. Okay, okay.
Forever. That's the fear. Once it's, and especially the bridges, or especially the lines of very tall buildings, which could be there, but as you know, there could be 100 of them, and you draw 100 of them, because the building arises, comes off your sphere. Mine goes on to the drawing from the decision of that, rather than the 2,000 that I could have done. So once you do the big one that makes the volume of the building come up for the first time, if it's a mistake, it is a mistake forever, and it's the wrong place, or it's twisted,
I know in terms of the logic of only using lines, we know from our early drawings is the most unforgiving logic that you can use, because every single line is visible in the final drawing. It may seem counterintuitive, but once you introduce shading, you can hide all sorts of mistakes. So I think that for us, we used to feel a little more of the it's got to be perfect, make sure it's in the right spot, and don't wobble too much. But now that we're using shading, I can place a line a quarter of an inch off of where it's supposed to land, and then just correct it and draw a second line, and it basically gets covered over enough with shading that you don't notice the first line. It's more forgiving.
That is why I envy you, because I just wish and the more I tell myself, relax, change something, and make it more forgiving, and the more I become obsessed with finding the right line. And maybe I'm going one day, I'll either stop drawing, which could be an excellent solution, or be able to enjoy technology, and I think it's fantastic. But if I had the possibility of undoing Control Z and Apple, I would use it all the time, and I would lose the fear that I do believe that adds to some kind of quality to the work. And that's why before I was saying that we should all agree that we're talking about drawing, because drawing has these very cruel aspects that go with it. Painting and all of the other fantastic disciplines and techniques slide toward a completely different artistic endeavor, in which the process continuously happens and fixes itself, and once you synthesize and move away, and you end up doing drawings, the next thing is either doing nothing or doing words, or what is after that. And Saul Steinberg's work that we were talking about before is the one who has pushed the edge probably as far as it can go in terms of drawing. He is at the edge of a cliff. He's on a cliff where next is a novel, next is words, and but I still envy you and wish I had a twin.
So I'm gonna ask a technical question. So, have you ever made a mistake, and do you start over?
I have made different kinds of mistakes, because the paper is the architect's sketchy paper. There is
like violet or like vellum?
I wish it's the sketch paper, which is extremely light. It's called sketch. It's just sketch paper. It comes in yellow. Also, architects like to use the yellow one because it's more. Whereas there is also the white one that I use that is less forgiving because there's no background. In a few cases, the humidity is the biggest enemy, and in a few circumstances, I've either the umbrella is flying away. I've either, maybe a little spit, and the paper. So that's it.
Do you choose the tracing paper because of how it takes the ink?
Yes, and that's the only. There is not because any. No, because that kind of paper takes the kind of ink and pens that we shared when we talked.
What type of pens do you use? The micron?
Yes, I've used that one and also the Stedler. The Stedler, and the longer the little felt when it breaks, that's the moment when the line conveys even more of the fear. I tend to break it. Yes, I push so that does the funny noise, and the precision is gone, and it records much more of your tentativeness and fear, etc. Because again, architecture matters, meaning that all of the studies and working as an architect, imagine an architectural drawing. It's one of the most. It is a drawing, but its narrative is about precision. This kind of line means that you're going to build this. This kind of line means that this is going to resist from bending or heating, and it's all about the label attached to the kind of line. So handmade architectural drawings are absolutely fantastic, and probably that's the where I come from.
Yeah, and definitely architecture with its straight edges and architecture being depicted with fewer lines as opposed to more lines requires a more scrutiny and precision. The fewer lines, the harder it is. The fewer lines, the easier it is to notice mistakes.
Yeah. I think there is something to the commitment of a line and the fear that goes along with it, and knowing that you have to, there is no control Z, and you have to stick with that decision that kind of gives integrity to a piece, to an image. Yeah. I'll share that. So we have a technique of removing lines, of erasing lines.
We don't like use it.
It takes a long time. The new line will never be as fresh as the original line, but nonetheless, we and probably every drawing have removed mistakes. Almost every drawing, I would say. And it's a fairly simple technique. It's we will intentionally work on very thick paper, like a cotton drawing paper, Fabriano Artistico, that's almost a 1/16 of an inch thick. So that if a line goes down that shouldn't be there, you can take a razor blade afterwards and shave off the paper fibers on the top of the paper and create a very subtle little divot where it goes back to white. I mean, you could still perceive it if you look very closely. And if you draw back over top of the area that's been scratched off, the ink is prone to diffuse a little more to the paper. It's somewhat apparent.
That's how, when I studied architecture, we used to use vellum in the 90s and, 80s, 90s. And the only way to draw architectural drawings was on very thick vellum and, the rapidograph. And the only way to erase was with the blade. And so if I were a bit smarter, I could use that and be able to erase. But the other thing that we used to do was to use the finger oil, because it gives back, but it's only on vellum. So once you wrap oil, even it brings back some kind of a coating, so that the next line doesn't. Maybe you take the drawing in.
That's good. That's good. So after it's cut into, to reseal the vellum, so the ink doesn't diffuse too much. Yeah. There was a while where we were somewhat heavily relying on the idea that we could curate, we could take a line off, and we eventually decided to stop doing that and to stick with a mistake instead of correcting it, because you'll never get the freshness. You'll never get the flick of the pen colliding across the surface of the paper if you take it off and do it again.
Well, and in addition, the physical surface of cotton paper as opposed to vellum is a bunch of fibers that have been they were originally in a paper pulp vat mixed with water, and they were strained out and then pressed. And the pressed the surface that exists across the brand new sheet of paper is this super even pressed series of fibers. And as soon as you scratch the top layer off, you open up the fibers that were buried down a little bit deeper in the paper, and they're all like sitting at slightly more skew angles, and they're not nearly as smooth. And you can take like glassine or tracing paper and lay it over top, and then get a bone folder and burnish it back down and try and make it flat again. But it will never have the same pressed quality that came from when the paper pulp was wet. And the ink will always bleed into it more than it would have.
What about slicing a line out?
Yeah, that's the recent secret. Instead of scratching, you actually just very, very delicately cut along both sides of the black line, and then you can peel the line off with it, like a tissue paper thin layer comes off the paper, and it's less noticeable. But in raking light, it will always be there. It will always be apparent. Ryan said that we've curated on almost all drawings, but the recent drawings have not had. We've just come to accept that if a mistake is there, it's okay.
Another little secret here. If you're viewing our drawings on our website or somewhere, the image that we did of we were invited to Chicago, and we did a series of pieces around Chicago. One of them was a portrait of Anish Kapoor's sculpture Cloud Gate, which is dubbed the Bean by Chicagoans. And it's this polished stainless steel, chrome mirror reflective, enormous object, 33 feet by 66 feet. It looks like a bulb of mercury. And that's such an unforgiving form. I mean, you're talking about this perfectly chrome surface with a reflection of the city in it, and then on the top edge, one line that defines this enormous thing, and that line cannot veer off.
So what was the logic when you set up for the logic of the drawing? What was the logic behind the shades?
No shading. At that point, it was only defining edges, and not drawing anything that moved. So the sun passing through the sky wouldn't be included. People walking through the square would not be included, even though that space was so populated with people. It was unrealistic to draw it as a just barren patio. But nonetheless, that was our logic at the time. And we were crunching pretty hard to get the piece completed. We had a series of deadlines on the horizon, and I remember that I had gone to get us lunch. Like we were doing 7 days a week, full days, getting there as early as possible. You have to kick off at sundown. It was the summer, so the days were long, and we'd been out there for a long time. And I had left to go get us some sort of food, and Trevor, in the meantime, put in his earpiece with his cell phone, and called his girlfriend, and was chatting while he was drawing, and this had him slightly distracted. Which I guess we'll ask you: do you ever talk? Do you ever converse with people while you're working?
Something that happens all the time. Yes, you shouldn't. Yes.
Yes. So we definitely learned the hard way. So he half of his mind was in the phone conversation, half of his mind was in putting the lines on a piece of paper, and the very top edge veered off about 1/8 of an inch, and we're talking about a single line that is going through blank white sky. It's a one-shot deal, and it veered off so severely it was maddening. So I came back and realized that this error had occurred, and there wasn't really anything we could do on the spot. It was humid out, it was damp, so the paper was soggy, and you can't scratch out, you can't curate while it's soggy. You have to let it, I mean, even the ink, you should let the ink dry for 30 days, 60 days, so it's really, really bone dry before you can scratch it off without it kind of smearing it back into the lower paper fibers. So we had to temporarily live with this glaring error, and give it a couple months, and then eventually we went in and scratched it off. But in the original drawing, if you get a chance to look at it, you can, if you know where to look, you can detect that there's
You didn't keep the mistake.
No, we scratched it off.
I would have kept the mistake. I would like to add maybe one thing when we were talking about inclusion and exclusion, but if anybody wants to ask any question, it would be fantastic to just wave or whatever. One thing that I wanted to, there are two things that I remember we talked about it, were kind of interesting about the knowledge of a place. In addition to the physical line, I experienced something that I didn't expect to experience when I worked on London, because I didn't know London at all. New York was an obvious kind of work in order to try and understand the place. But when I was commissioned to do the London similar project, the system was a little bit clearer, as I explained before. Thousands of photos, 100-kilometer walking, and then sit down for months and try to make something out of it. But the first time I went back to London, because I went there, spent weeks doing this, and then came home. Actually, it was here in Torino, and the first time I went back to the publisher to show the progress, I took a train that was going into the city exactly at the point where I just finished my drawing at that moment. So I was moving left to right, west to east, and I saw a physical line sitting on the landscape, dividing what was completely 100% known. I had done all of this looking and deciding which line to do. All of the details were either there or not there. So every building was completely known, and to the rest of it, total unknown, a desert of a place that I'd never seen before. And that moment was very telling, because in New York it didn't happen, because I kind of knew the city already, and it made me realize, with my talking to myself, that this process that you show in a mirror-like way, meaning reflecting onto your sphere what goes on inside, in reality you end up knowing a place in a way that nobody else does. And I realized that I knew London in a way that many Londoners didn't even think to try to know. But what did it mean? It didn't mean anything. I knew nothing of the names of all of the buildings that I was drawing so well. So I keep wondering, and it's an unresolved question. What kind of knowledge does drawing bring? Is it a knowledge that can be conveyed? It cannot be conveyed, because one looks at the drawing, and it's kind of funny. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, so that we can talk about inclusion and exclusion. Once I was asked by someone who looked at the London drawing in front of him, he said, "But how many things have you drawn?" As if the quantity was overwhelming, and it was surprising to me, because what matters to me the most, or what I notice the most, is how much I have not drawn. I could point at the non-existing things that I wish I had put, because the envy, so to speak, the jealousy. What I see in your drawing is that everything is there than my few things.
Generally, what things do you leave out?
I don't know. Everything that the logic that you discuss, you can discuss. The shading, the edge. What is it? An edge? How much more important is an edge versus a change of plane? I don't talk about. If I talk about it with my wife, she thinks I'm crazy. If I don't have, again, I talk about it with myself. And so every time it's a decision, and decision is much more about the omission rather than, this is the line that matters. And why do I omit the line that is left to the edge, which, if you look at it, it's really there? I don't know. And I think the beauty of the fact that drawing is at the edge of something else that is probably nothing or worth.
It is true that there's tremendous omission. Have you ever focused on biological, like entities like trees or plants? Do those ever get incorporated?
Trees, yes. I used to trees have been a nightmare in like a few years ago, and recently I've been able to come to terms with them and love them. But I treat them the same way, as if they were permanent elements. Everything that is transient, temporary, worries me. And this is another thing that was interesting. A tree?
No, waving.
Ah, waving.
A question.
Waving.
Hello, thanks for the discussion. I have a question about all this fear about doing the perfect line, and even the trees that are seems to be frightening up to those recent days. Okay, your art of drawing is time is ticking. You are doing one line and it's fixed in the time. Musicians have an art that they can, before the performance, the day of the concert, they can do mistakes and it's not recorded. I can record it, but it's not in the public. Officially, it's not done. Why don't you try to draw, even if it's mistake at home by yourself? And one day you tell that this day at 20, I will draw this drawing. And I have all the training of, I don't know, 1 month. I've done this 30 times. And I found it exactly the way to do it. And I do it like 20 times perfect. So this day, I have a good meal with my wife, and then at this time I will draw it, and I prepare the perfect place. It's the perfect day, and I draw it, and there is no doubt about if it's good or not. It is already good in you, so you will do it.
That's the day when you screw up. That is the perfect explanation of the perfect storm. Everything is so perfect that you do it and it flops. The thing about drawing is that I know exactly what you're saying, and I appreciate your advice, and I don't know if I want to take away the fear out of the lines. Fear is probably a too loaded word, and I think it's maybe wrong. Another one would work better. But if I were to do that, it would make maybe more sense. But I have the feeling that even the way you presented it, with all of the things coming together after 20 days or 20 years, and then it doesn't work. There is something in drawing that no one sees, or often is seen in sketches that are often more appreciated than final drawings, which is the action of rehearsing. And the rehearsal part is a sketch, but I know that it's a rehearsal. I don't feel the tension, and it will never be like the same. The funny thing about line drawings is that it's a kind of performance that you do for yourself alone, that you can love or hate, and nobody probably will ever realize that. And it finishes there, but it stays there forever. When I see their work, and I notice more of the performing side of it, because I can see, where their pen was going and moving. I feel the desire of doing that much more, because we are looking for the same synthesis, but in a completely different way. So maybe I'll try, but my fear again is that after a lot of preparation, then you flop.
Then if you try, and then I sit there. If you try, I don't know, but when I try to rehearse, I have to imagine the public, to create it in my imaginary, and to make it as truth, as if it was really the concert. It's just a rehearsal. But if I really believe, I mean, my reality become what I believe. And it's not more for you a rehearsal. Officially it's a rehearsal, but for you it's more important than the real day, because you're creating the real drawing that you will draw this day.
You're better.
That makes me think of what's the sort of goal of making a drawing, and is it to say that I can masterfully depict this scene such that you recognize it as a said scene, and I think it's more about getting across the sort of human human life, like human existence, that even to grappling with what you're doing is expressing that the humanity, your humanity was present while that was made, and that will relay and be able to be picked up on by viewers who can relate their own humanity to the life that they're probably grappling with, their own putting one foot in front of the other for whatever it is they're doing, or just that the meat that's in seeing something that's sort of tried for is just as valid and maybe even more truthful than the perfect perfection.
Something else that you make me think of, probably because I'm an architect, probably because I'm interested in mostly in what we think rather than what we see, which is similar but slightly different. My rehearsal phase and freer is different from what would seemingly should be, which is looking at. I've been recently working on projects that have to do with drawing window views of people, and by also then asking these very same people, often they're writers, to write about what they see, in order to put side by side a drawing and words and see where they touch each other, how far or how close. And when I did this project in New York, I was going to all of these dozens and dozens of apartments and take the photographs myself. And so I could already prepare for the work by taking the photos. Now that I do this from writers around the world, they send me the photographs. Sometimes they're very good at taking the photos, which means just shooting many. It's nothing to be good about. And so when I open these folders of window views that I've never seen before from places where I've never been, there is the rehearsal portion of the work is spending really sometimes days just to try and reconstruct in my brain what happens between the sheet of glass and what is outside. Because one photograph of a window view represents absolutely nothing. 30 or 40 photographs of a window view allow you to build the emptiness between the sheet of glass and the world outside. And that is an effort that cannot be easily replicated by drawing, cannot be easily helped by trying to see how should I do this tree, or it's of the person's eye, which is the glass, and it's a tiring endeavor because at the end it produces something very simple. Sometimes it's frustrating because I wish I could record all of this effort, and when I try to explain to these people from Asia or South America what they should send me in order to allow me to easily take the photographs, is that what I care about is what lies between, as I said before, the sheet of glass on the outer edge and the world. That nothingness is really the window view. And so the sketching may be necessary just to figure out the location of certain things in relation to something else, in relation to the viewpoint. And in this case, the viewpoint resembles yours more than in the cityscapes. But then the moment of doing the real drawing will always come. You can rehearse more. It's like an asymptote to perfection. You can rehearse forever, but you will always have that moment in which you put it there and it's there forever. And I think that by rehearsing less the kind of lines, you give the drawing more life rather than rehearsing the lines more to get it more perfect. What matters is that you have worked out all of the details absolutely well, and that's the rehearsal of the musician, but then the line is fresh because you've never done it before. Yes. And so that's the answer, the real answer.
Yeah. I like that. This is one more note about rehearsing. The drawings that we do take like 21 days, 15 days. Some of them have taken 30, 35 days, and they're made in a linear sweep. Like they're panning from from right to left, which I think your cityscapes are as well. You start from left to right. So day one is the rightmost column, and that might be day one, day two, day three, and day four. You progress across, and always with almost every single drawing, you can see the quality of the line get better as it pans across. Even in this packet, I think there's an image of a New York cityscape, and if you look at the at the right edge, that's day one, and it's very kind of knobbly. And by the time you pan across to, well, in this case, it was day 5, I think. The buildings are much more finely rendered, and that's pretty much consistent with all of our works.
Exactly the same with me. And the fear I was talking about before is that your first strip versus my first left end of the drawing sets the tone, and then that's when things don't work. And in my case, it may take a year to finish the drawing. So from beginning to end, I see a year that has gone by of getting better. And if I could, I would start from zero again and never end, because it's a never-ending process. And that's the funny thing about time. But that's also something very nice about our mechanisms, because again, when you paint and sculpture, the whole is always there in front of you to be readdressed as a whole. In these techniques of ours, time is beautifully cruel, because once you're done, you're stuck with it. Move on, forget about it. So it's also from a kind of spiritual. It's good learning.
The process of a drawing coming into existence from one side, left, right in our case, to left in your case to right, and the effect that you mentioned earlier of where you had London and then desert. You drawn the buildings up to here, and then all you had was your baseline. So like city and desert. We experienced the same, the exact same effect of space being completely volumized and molded and existing, and then a sharp edge where it turns to completely blank paper, and the paper jumps forward and is this flat thing that sits on the surface. We're getting signals. So if you have any last points, feel free to pitch them in.
What about, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about how you each arrived at working with the city? You have very similar subject matter.
Living. How did we arrive at working on the city? For living in the city.
Yeah. The question is, how do we arrive at working on the city? And I think it's the same answer for both of us. We lived in New York City, and it was reaching out to draw what was most immediately at hand. Speaking for us, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just what was kind of visually powerful that was right there, and trying to record that. I don't know, does that speak for you?
Yes, but I never. I always had very funny feelings about cities. I grew up in Milano, and I grew up in Milano 70s, and unfortunately I never enjoyed being in Milano. I don't know if there's anybody from Milano. Don't want to speak negatively about the city, but I never understood why we were supposed to live in amalgams of buildings, apart from the fact that there are more people and maybe more opportunities. So Milano never kind of conveyed to me the fact that cities of energy. I used to go often back to the country, central Italy, where my family is from, and that makes more sense. The country and villages, that seems the normal way to live. When I moved to New York in '95, I realized that cities have energy, have a soul, have a want to be told about themselves. That New York is probably the place more than certainly any city that I've ever known on this side of the ocean, that as soon as you arrive, you feel like being asked, so what do you think about me? The city wants to know how the outsider sees you, and that's fantastic, because as a European Italian, I was used to the fact that cities, before you're able to know them, you have to read books, look at the archaeological stuff and see what was there before, how the Renaissance went, if you a lot or a little. And then maybe you look at the maps and see how the transformations occurred. And so it was a very laborious enterprise. New York is instantaneous. You know, it's there, it's not done, it's being worked on, it's not finished. And it never occurred to me that cities could not be finished. They could only be, you know, augmented from the outskirts and ruined, but not finished. They're all finished. And all of this created an incredible sense of motion and curiosity. And luckily, architecture and drawing were my key. And so the Circle Line tour that I really advise all of you to take. You didn't, but you should. It's a 3-hour boat tour around the island of Manhattan that only tourists take. And that was the moment when I realized that the distance, maybe trying to draw everything rather than... The big difference between everything rather than something. And what is really everything. So Manhattan is a big island, but what it really is it big, is it small, tall? And drawing is one key to try to unlock all of this. And also, I believe that these are landscapes that, you know, a few hundred years ago did not exist. So seeing what you see from that window across, you are suspended in the sky on something that was man-made, and see a landscape that is man-made. And this is like virtual reality. You know, it's completely crazy.
Yeah, it is completely crazy. One of the other things that excited us was that you capture the city now. It's going to change tomorrow. I mean, it's you're going to end up doing a portrait of that year, that month, of these cities that are constantly in flux. Are we out of time? Should we take questions? Or if there's no questions, thank you everyone for coming.